In this tutorial, I'll demonstrate how to edit this photo to improve the overall appearance by adjusting the shadows and highlights, the vibrance, and the color balance. Just full disclosure, this is an extremely tricky photo to edit. This food in this image, it's not really appealing. It doesn't really look appetizing. It's going to be challenging to make this look appetizing in any way, shape, or form. So just know that we're looking for some overall improvement here. We are not looking for you to be a miracle worker. All right, so let's get started with duplicating our background layer. So go to the layer menu, duplicate layer, and this is how we are non-destructively editing this photo. We can always revert back to the original. We can delete layers if we adjust something and don't feel that the adjustment is actually an improvement. So I now have a background copy. Something else that we're going to start introducing to you at this point is renaming your layers, because it gets to the point where you have so many layers that if you don't label them clearly as you go, you're going to get lost in Photoshop, and you'll not be able to edit the way you want to because you can't figure out which layer does which thing. So double click where it says background copy and rename that layer to shadows highlights. So now I know exactly what type of edits are on this layer, and now we can get started with the editing. So go to image adjustments and go down to shadows and highlights. You'll notice right off the bat that the shadows slider is probably moved up because Photoshop is smart enough to know that the photo has some pretty dark shadows that need to be brightened up. I do want you to slide that back to 0 because I like to start at the beginning. Look at the original image, start at the beginning, and then take it all the way to the extreme and see what happens. Okay, this is going to remind you of what type of change will take place by adjusting the slider. I want you to do the same thing for the highlights. Take it to the extreme. Okay. And then once you have a feel for what that slider does, then you can go and make your adjustments slowly. Okay. Normally, images don't look good when they're adjusted all the way to the extreme. Okay. So take the shadows slider and slide it over nice and slow. I'm going to be looking at a dark shadow in the top left-hand corner of this image as I slide this, because that's one of the darkest areas that I'm looking to reduce the shadow. So I'm sliding this over. It is getting brighter. It's minimal. I want to be careful. I don't want to eliminate too many shadows. We've got the chicken in the middle. It's super bright. It's super shiny. I don't want that to blind people when they're looking at this image. So I'm going to leave the shadow increase to 45%, and then I'll adjust the highlights. You might decide you don't want to adjust the highlights. This is your photo. You are trying to edit this to improve the overall appearance. So you make the adjustments that you think make sense. All right, when you're satisfied, you click OK. And then you can hide this layer to see the original, and then turn it back on to see your improvements. Okay, so if you're satisfied with the shadows and highlights, we're going to duplicate that layer to try the next edit. So again, we're duplicating the shadows and highlights layer. We're not duplicating the background. Layer, duplicate layer. You'll notice that you can also rename the layer when you're creating it. So that's something you might want to do. In this edit, we are going to look at the vibrance. So you can type vibrance and hit OK. And now we have a vibrance layer. So if you think about this, the vibrance layer is the exact same thing currently as the shadows and highlights layer. There's no difference in the image when you turn it off. So basically, we're taking the photo that you've edited so far for shadows and highlights, and now we're going to continue to do edits. If you get to a place where you've adjusted the vibrance in a way where you don't think it actually improves the appearance of the image, you can just delete that layer and you won't delete all the edits that you've done. The shadows and highlight settings are still there because that layer is still there, all right? So again, we're just trying to focus on doing this strategically so we're not completely destructing the original image in a way where we can't ever revert back to something. All right, so let's go to image adjustments, and we're going to go down to Vibrance. And here's our Vibrance slider. Again, take it to the extreme, see what it does. Okay, we certainly don't want to wash it out. We don't want it to be so vibrant that it hurts our eyes. Adjust the saturation, remind yourself of what that does. We certainly don't want it to be a black and white image. That is not the goal today. So again, you're going to use your best judgment. You're going to try to adjust vibrance to a point where you think it actually improves the image. And sometimes it's hard and you're looking at it and you're like, is that even making a difference? It is. And, if you take it to the extreme, it is more obvious. Okay, we don't want to wash it out. So again, if you get lost and you're like, I don't even remember where I started, go back to 0 and just do some slight improvements. Okay, same thing with the saturation. Do I want it less saturated? Probably not. I don't think graying it out in any way, shape, or form is going to be helpful. But I also don't want it to be like bright red. So go back to 0, slide it a little bit, and see if that helps. All right, hit OK. Turn off the vibrance layer, turn it back on. Is this an improvement? It's a little warmer. The red is a little more red. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to see when I'm done with everything if that's something that I still want to keep. Okay, so now I'll duplicate the vibrance layer, duplicate layer, and this time we'll focus on the color balance. And again, right now the color balance layer is exactly the same as the vibrance layer because we haven't done any color balance edits yet. And that's what we're going to do now. So we'll go to image adjustments. We'll go to color balance. And this one definitely gets tricky. So I just want to remind you that you can adjust the tone balance and the color balance all in this setting. So you've got mid tones, which is what it should automatically be set to when you open up this option. But you also have shadows that you can adjust the color of, and you have highlights. All right. So start with the midtones. And again, take the sliders to the extreme. You're like, oh yeah, okay, that's going to make everything bright red. That's not great. Oh, and cyan food is not super appealing generally, especially when it's chicken. So we'll put that back to 0. We're going to test out the other sliders, remind ourselves of what that does. And the same thing with blue and yellow. So this is definitely tricky. You might find that for the midtones, you don't want to adjust anything. That could be a decision that you make. Play around with the highlights, play around with the shadows. Even little adjustments are still adjustments. So, don't write off color balance adjustments off the bat. Make an honest effort to try to improve the image. And that's all we're looking for here, some improvement. When you're satisfied with your adjustments, click OK. And then again, and I don't think I actually made any adjustments, but I would compare what I just did to the layer underneath, which is the vibrance and the shadow and highlights all together. And I would just kind of compare. This is the original, improving the shadow and highlight, improving the vibrance, and then improving the color balance. Did I end up with something that's better than the original? If you're like, oh, the color balance is not adding anything to this, click on the layer, hit the trash can, and click yes. Delete that layer, and then you can save this as a JPEG. You might decide the color balance is useful. You want to keep it in there, and that's totally fine too. All right. So again, you are saving this as a JPEG when you're done and uploading it to your Google slideshow. And I look forward to seeing what you come up with for this challenging edit. Have fun.